What's up, YouTube? I am the Vin of the Nerd, and today I want to talk about Superman 2025. Now, full disclosure, this video is actually already recorded. I just originally had it as part of my review. However, it alone was 15 minutes long, so that's a pretty sizable chunk, especially when most of my reviews are under 20 minutes. So, yeah, that review is going to be very, very long of the actual movie, but this one is just addressing the question, does this movie work as a good foundation for the DC cinematic universe? And I'm excited to talk about that, and I'm excited to share my thoughts in that, because that is what I originally was trying to address. I just thought I could tack it on to my review, but it ended up being a much longer section than I envisioned. So you get an extra video from me with this. So anyway, that's what this video is, trying to tackle that. Obligatory spoiler warning, this will be containing spoilers for all of Superman 2025. So if you haven't seen it, get out now, because it's not worth being spoiled over through a goofy little YouTube video like this. It's really a good movie. So definitely you want to watch the Superman movie before you watch this video. But one thing I want to say before we get into the video, with this video having been recorded when originally part of the whole review, there may be a few things I say that I'll talk about later, which I really won't talk about later because that's in the actual review. So bear with me. With that, I'll try and put some notes up on screen to tell you when something is off or whatever. But otherwise, if there's any weird discrepancies there, just acknowledge that. For the most part, I don't think there'll be much of an issue. So yeah, enjoy. Hope this is a fun video. Okay, so Superman was the first movie of the DCU, which, starting off, let's just talk about the DCU. It's a rebrand. The Snyderverse that came before it, which was called the Snyderverse, but actually, officially, it was called the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe. They did a rebrand, and now it's the DCU to match up with Marvel's MCU. I think that's smart, but I do think it's a little funny because DC, there's just a lot of DCs here, right? Because you got DC for DC Comics, and then C for Cinematic, and then Universe. But then DC is funny because DC Comics has been hilarious for a long time because it stands for Detective Comics. So you're looking at Detective Comics, Cinematic Universe, DC cubed, U. Anyway, I just think it's kind of funny. I don't want to bring it up here. Either way, I do like the new name, DCU. I think it works. I think you're aligning yourself with the Marvel. People are used to cinematic universes now, so just saying this is the DC cinematic universe versus the Marvel cinematic universe makes a whole lot of sense. I think that works really, really well. But regardless, Superman was the first movie of the DCU, and therefore it was going to set a big tone for this universe going forward. I mean, they went to all the effort to reboot this franchise, taking away big characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and replacing them with a younger cast, although they haven't done the other two yet. But, you know, we do have a brand new Superman and a brand new Lex Luthor and Lois Lane. So all of those have been recast from the Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Jesse Eisenberg era, which is fine. But what does that mean? Like, is it worth it? Do they do a better take on these characters? Is this adaptation significantly different enough to make me think that a reboot was necessary? And short answer is yes, absolutely. They did a fantastic job, and I'm really glad that DC decided to just cut ties and do a hard reboot. I mean, I know it's not super hard. I know there are a couple characters transferring over from that old universe, Peacemaker notably, and a few others, but that's beside the point. The point is that this really is signaling a new reboot, a new universe, and this is setting a new tone moving forward. And so there was a lot riding on this movie and how well it was going to do. So I'm excited to talk about that here. So in setting that tone, I loved they did the opening crawl. The opening crawl was absolutely fantastic, because the first couple kind of talk about where this movie sits in relation to the wider universe and where the wider universe is kind of starting out, right? You know, Superman's only been operating for 3 years as a full-fledged superhero, stuff like that. And then the last couple kind of get you set up for this movie specifically. Superman just stopped a political armed conflict, and now he's facing the consequences of that action, which is really exciting and really fun. I have a question for the wider universe. Why does the first line say 3 centuries ago the first superpowered beings known as metahumans appeared on Earth? And why only 3 centuries ago? Because I know like 3 is the big motif and they use 3 a bunch, and I actually kind of like that they just keep using 3. I think that's very fun and makes the opening crawl a little bit more engaging than if it was just random numbers and stuff. But it still begs the question, why 3 centuries ago? Because I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense no matter how you look at it, right? Those of us who know about the wider DC universe know that this number doesn't hold up under a lot of scrutiny, right? Because even if we just look at humans on Earth that are superpowered, there are numerous examples of beings like that who have been around for longer than 3 centuries. The two that come to mind for my money are Vandal Savage and Wonder Woman, right? Vandal Savage is a caveman that slept next to a glowing rock and became immortal because of that. It's a little goofy of a history, but he's actually a really cool villain, a really interesting guy. But he's been around for virtually all of human recorded history and stuff, over 50,000 years old, according to some websites and stuff, some databases and whatnot. And then, like, Wonder Woman, they're ancient Greeks. The Themysciran and Amazon people are ancient Greeks. So even if Wonder Woman isn't that old, like, the Amazons have been around since, like, 3,000, 5,000 years. You know, like, that's more than 3 centuries on both accounts. So I don't know why they went with 3 centuries. And it's possible this is referring to, like, costumed vigilantes. But most of those appeared in, like, the early 1920s, 1940s, you know, when there was more of the pulp action hero than the actual superhero. But I digress. I think the best way we can look at this is maybe this is when, like, the world at large became aware of metahumans for the first time, because notably both Vandal Savage and the Amazons are pretty secretive people. They kind of hide in the shadows and don't make a big splash for many, many years. So I guess you could say that. But then that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because 300 years ago, if this takes place in 2025 or roughly thereat, is 1725. So, like, the age of pirates. Like, was the first metahuman a pirate that announced himself to the world? Like, I don't know. That just seems a little confusing. And I'm really curious if they'll ever explain this, or if it's just meant to be some fun little thing for us fans to deliberate over. I don't know. It is an interesting thought, and I want to know what your guys' thoughts are down in the comments. So send me a comment telling me about what you think this line means. But pulling ourselves out of that rabbit hole, I do appreciate that a lot of superheroes have been around for a very, very long time. I like that Superman is not the first superhero. He probably is taking inspiration from a lot of superheroes that came before. It's cool to think that maybe even some of the Justice Gang members, like Mr. Terrific or Guy Gardner's Green Lantern, have been operating as superheroes longer than even Superman, which is really cool and interesting to see. And I love how this differentiates the DCU from the MCU, because instead of trying to do like an Iron Man, Captain America 1, Thor 1 type situation where they set up all these individual heroes and then bring them together, they're just like, no, this universe is already populated full of superheroes. That's already a thing. And now we're kind of coming in at the middle of it, and how does that look? How does Superman's entrance affect the rest of the DC universe? Because despite his depowered nature in this movie, he is still the most powerful metahuman. And I do agree with that statement in the film, and so it'll be interesting to see how he affects the wider DC universe, even though it already has superheroes. He's not changing the game dramatically in terms of being in terms of being the first superhero, but he is changing it in terms of being the most powerful superhero. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Speaking about the tone of this world, I love that there is essentially a monster of the week, or if not day, because like in this movie alone, we have the Hammer of Baravia attack Metropolis, we have the Kaiju attack Metropolis, we have the interdimensional space imp attack Metropolis, you have a space rift form in Metropolis. Like, this movie has a lot of disasters happening on Metropolis. Some people think that's a bad thing and like makes for bad storytelling, but I think quite the opposite. I think this makes it for a very comic booky type story, a very comic book feeling type movie, and I love that about the DC universe. I love that they're not bothering with trying to have internal consistencies like that, or not internal consistencies, but like they aren't worried about the ramifications of having all of these monsters there. It's just like, yeah, this happens on a daily, don't worry about it. Superman has got to have super powered things to do, you know, he's got to have super heroics to accomplish, and so they do that with all these characters and with all these tragic events and stuff, and I like that. I like that tone for the DCU. I like that a kaiju can invade Metropolis, and we don't need any explanation as to what it is, where it came from, or anything like that, besides the fact that, yeah, Lex Luthor found it somehow, some way, and let it loose on Metropolis, and that's honestly good enough for me. Rounding out the setting and really just the tone and vibe of the new DCU, I love the look of Metropolis. I love how bright and hopeful it is, as opposed to the dark and gritty nature of the DCEU, or aka the Snyderverse. I loved Luthor Corps. I loved how it looked. I loved the the pocket dimension space. That was really cool. It was really neat to see all the bright colors contrasted with the really dark tone. That was really fun. The Fortress of Solitude was awesome. I love how it grows and shrinks in the ice over and over again. And I like the Daily Planet. So yeah, there was a really good setting, and I really liked how bright this movie was, because I'm used to darkly lit movies that are very that it's really hard to tell what's happening with all the action stuff. And while there were still some quick cuts in the fights and stuff like that, for the most part, it was really easy to track what was happening, who was where, and how all the action was working. And I really liked that for this movie, and I hope it's something they continue on in future DCU movies moving forward. So overall, the first thing I just want to say about Superman, with all that I just said, is to kind of conclude with the sentence of the DCU started off on a really good foot. I love the new tone and vibe of this DC cinematic universe. I love the direction they're going. I love all the recastings. We'll get into the individual characters here in a bit. But I just love how they handled everything. I think they did such a good job. And I think it proved its need for a reboot. I don't think you could have had Henry Cavill suddenly take such a hard turn to this story. Not only is this Superman less powerful than his Superman, but also this Superman is just more hopeful. The Metropolis is brighter lit. The Lex Luthor has more rage and is more specific. I don't know. I just think this movie justified its need for a reboot and worked well. And it's at this point I do want to give a soft acknowledgement of just saying, look, I am sad that Henry Cavill did not get a chance at redemption. He had Man of Steel, which I thought was a really good movie despite all its issues and stuff. But outside of that, Batman v Superman and Justice League really weren't the greatest movies, and I'm sad that Henry Cavill didn't get a chance to tell a really cool trilogy or even just a second movie that gave him some redemption as the character of Superman, because I did like his take on Superman. I did like the Man of Steel. I think he's a great guy, but I get why they decided to go in a different direction. And I think it's really telling that James Gunn sat down with Henry Cavill specifically and had a one-on-one conversation with him to kind of let him go and tell him, like, look, it's not you. It's just we got to go in some different direction. And I really appreciate that. So I'm not trying to say I hate Henry Cavill or anything. I'm just trying to say I like this version of Superman, and I like that we're going in a different direction than the dark, almost depressing vibe of the Snyderverse movies of the DCEU. So that's all I'll say about it. Maybe I'll make a longer video comparing Man of Steel and Superman and talking about why I love both movies and why I'm appreciative that Superman is the movie we get to go with moving forward. But that'll be a different video for another day. So, what you just heard was the original conclusion I gave to this section of my review. Now that it is functioning as the conclusion for the video, I thought it didn't work as well, so I wanted to just give a conclusion that kind of ties this video together and just say once again that I do think Superman 2025 is a great foundation for the DCU. I think the opening crawl was a really good way to start off this movie. It differentiated it from a lot of other superhero movies. I don't think every DCU movie needs an opening crawl, but it worked really well for this one. I love the pre-established world with pre-established superheroes. That's really cool. I love the crisis of the week mentality. The fact that you have a bunch of different crises happening in Metropolis all at once. It honestly justifies the need and reason for superheroes to exist in the first place if you're having so many consistent crises that regular emergency helpers are just not qualified to handle. Like, no police guy was ever going to stop the kaiju or the rift. You need your superheroes then. And I think that works really well. I love how well lit this movie was. It just worked really, really well on all those. But the last thing I want to emphasize that I only touched on briefly is the depowered nature of Superman and how that will help set up a better universe moving forward. Because unlike the Justice League movie, where you're kind of questioning, why does Superman need the Justice League? Why does he need help if he's just so powerful he can beat all of them? In this movie, it's very clear that he is not so powerful that he does not need other superheroes' help. It was made very evident that he needs other superheroes in this movie, whether it was Mr. Terrific saving him in the pocket dimension, or Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl going to Baravia to help out with the Jarhanpur border dispute while Superman was helping in Metropolis. Or even just the fact that Mr. Terrific is super smart, and so he's the only one that could actually fix the rift without getting Lex Luthor's help, you know? Like, Superman wasn't going to be able to do that. It required a smart person to be there to solve the problem, and Superman is not super smart. He is very super in a lot of other ways, and he's clever, but he is not super smart. And so, by making Superman less powerful than they had him in previous iterations, it actually justifies the need for a superhero team around him and for a wider DC universe, which I think is really cool, and yet another reason why this movie works as such a good foundation for future DCU stories and shows and movies and stuff. So that's what I want to say. I think this is a fantastic foundation. If nothing else, it got me so excited for future DCU projects. I am looking forward to Supergirl. I'm looking forward to future movies. I'm just excited. So yay.